Hi, it's Miss Ellen from Spellbinders. Today I'm going to tell you the story of the three ants. Now, once upon a time, deep in the woods, there lived a poor old man in a hut with his only child, a daughter. His wife had died many years before. He got on just fine by shooting birds, sometimes bigger animals. They were able to trade for the provisions they needed. They kept a small garden. And the lass grew up to be a fair, beautiful young woman. She was hard-working, and she was clever. By the time she was grown, she felt it was time to go off and lessen the burden of her father. He agreed. He hadn't been able to teach her a whole lot besides for how to pluck a bird and roast it, and that if she thought she could earn her keep someplace else, he supported that decision, and off she went. She walked for days and days. She went to a town. She looked in the inn. She asked at the bakery, but there was no work there. Finally, she was able to find work in the castle. The queen was very pleased with this young lady. Again, she was very pleasant and hardworking. She found solutions to problems. Most people liked her in the castle, except for a group of maids. They would go in the corner. They would scheme and plot. They came up with a plan. They told the queen how they had heard the last talk about how she was able to take a pound of flax and spin it in 24 hours. "As you say, so shall you do," said the queen. Now this young maiden, she didn't want to say that she didn't know how to spin. So she just asked to be put away in a room by herself. Up came that pound of flax. Up came the spinning wheel. She pushed the wheel one way. She pushed it another way. She tried to get the levers to go, but she didn't know what she was doing. She cried. She was in distress. She felt out anxious. She didn't want to admit she didn't know what she was doing. When all of a sudden, a strange old woman appeared and asked, "What ails you, my child?" At first she didn't want to tell her. She didn't know who she was. And then she said, "I don't think you'll be able to help me." "You don't know unless you ask." Now that is true, she thought. So she confided in this old woman about the other maids and how they had said that she would be able to spin this pound of flax in 24 hours. "Well, well, be that as it may, if you call me aunt on your wedding day, I will take that flax and I will spin it for you. Now it is the hour of sleep. Please just go away." She did as she was told. She went to lay down to sleep, and when she awoke in the morning, there on the table, all of the flax had been spun into spools of yarn. She took it to the queen. The queen had never seen such fine yarn spun before. It was all even in thickness. She was even more delighted with this young lady. The other maids were even more envious. They went in the corner. They schemed, they plotted, they came up with a plan. They went to the queen and they told her how the lass had said she could take all of that yarn and weave it into bolts of linen in 24 hours. "As you say, so shall you do," said the queen. Once again, the young maiden didn't want to admit she didn't know how to weave. Again, as before, she asked just to be put away in a room by herself. The yarn was there. This huge loom was before her. She looked at it one way. She looked at it another way, but she didn't know where to begin. She was crying. She was in distress. She was anxious. She didn't want to admit she didn't know how to weave. Now, as before, in came a strange old woman and asked, "What ails you, my child?" And once again, she was hesitant to say what was her problem, but she remembered. Trusting had helped her before. So she told the old woman how the maids had schemed against her, how she was supposed to take this yarn and make it into bolts of fabric. "Well, well, be that as it may, if you call me aunt on your wedding day, I will take that yarn and I will weave it into bolts of linen for you." Now is the hour of sleep. Please just go away. And once again she did as she was told, and she went to lay down. When she awoke in the morning, there on the table were all the bolts of linen. It was weaved so clean and fine. She took it to the queen, who had never seen any bolts as soft and perfectly weaved. Once again, she felt even more fondness for this young lady. And once again, the other maids became even more bitter. They went in the corner, they schemed, they plotted, they came up with a plan. They told the queen that they had heard the lass say that she could take all those bolts of linen and make shirts for all the king's men. As you say, so shall you do, said the queen. And once again, as before, the maid did not want to admit she didn't know how to sew. She asked to be put away in a room. She looked at the bolts of linen. She looked at all the patterns for the king's men. She cried. She was in distress. She was anxious. She didn't want to admit she didn't know how to sew. When in came another strange old woman. What ails you, my child? And as before, she told her what was the problem. Well, well, be that as it may, if you call me aunt on your wedding day, I will sew the shirts for all the king's men. It is the hour of sleep. Now, please, just go away. Once again she went. She lay down to sleep, and in the morning when she awoke, all the king's men's shirts were laid out on the table. She took them to the queen. She couldn't believe the quality. She was so thrilled. She knew she could never love her as much as she would even her own daughter. She told this young maiden, "If you please, you may marry the prince. I know you'll never have to hire anyone because you know how to spin and weave and sew." Now the prince and the young maiden, they did like each other and got along quite well, and so a wedding was planned. The poor old man was brought in from the woods. It was so exciting on that day. Everyone was pleased. They were sitting down for the wedding feast when in walked an old woman. She was hideous, loathsome. She had a nose that was at least 6 inches long. Everyone stared. The bride jumped up and said, "Good day, my aunt." The prince looked at her. He looked back at the loathsome woman and said, "Are you related to my bride?" They both answered yes. "Come and join us for the wedding feast," he said. Though he couldn't believe that they could be related at all. Everyone in the hall, they all stared. They were sitting down, about to start eating again, when a second loathsome, hideous hag came walking in. She barely fit through her door, her behind was so big. She squeezed into the chair. The bride jumped up and said, "Good day, my aunt." And once again, the prince looked from the bride over to the aunt, to the bride again. "You guys are related?" "Why, yes, we are." He couldn't believe it. How could this be happening? Again, they sat down, was about to take a bite of food when a third hideous old hag came walking into the room. Her eyes were big as saucers, all red. Just looking at him made your eyes tear up. The bride jumped up. "Good day, my aunt." Once again, the prince looked from the bride to this hideous old woman, to the bride. How can they be related, he was thinking. Everyone in the room was thinking the exact same thing. Now, he didn't have the best manners in the world, even though he was a prince. And suddenly he blurted out, "How can you three be related to this beautiful young princess?" The first one spoke. "Well, you see, Your Highness, all these years I've been spinning and spinning, my nose so close as the flax is going through to become yarn, that my nose just kept on growing and growing and growing until it's as long as it is now." The second one explained, "Oh, I used to be as fair as my niece also when I was her age. But all the years sitting at the loom, weaving back and forth, my behind has spread and spread and spread. like the fabrics and bolts of linen before me. The third one said, I used to have eyes as clear and pretty as her, but all the years of sewing, the thread through all of the linen, my eyes have gotten wider and wider and wider, and now nothing can be done at all. The prince was relieved. I am so glad to know this. I know what to do. If all of this can happen from spinning and weaving and sewing, my bride, for all the days of your life, you shall never ever have to spin or weave or sew again. And they all lived happily ever after. Thank you. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you again here in Storyland.